January 27, 1945. Mid-afternoon, snow falls thick over the frozen fields of Holzheim, Belgium, turning the landscape into a world of white and shadow. The wind bites through wool uniforms, carrying the metallic scent of rifles and the faint tang of gunpowder lingering from distant skirmishes. Footsteps crunch on hardened snow, boots slipping over ice and frost-covered earth. Somewhere nearby, a machine gun spits fire in rapid bursts, echoing across the forest line. First Sergeant Leonard Funk moves cautiously with his squad. Every sound is amplified: the hiss of a misfiring weapon, the crack of a branch under a boot, the low murmur of German voices. Ahead, men drop to their knees. Funk's own soldiers, their hands raised, helmets pressed low, eyes wide with tension. Funk senses it immediately. They have walked into a trap. 90 armed German soldiers appear, surrounding the small American patrol. Rifles raised. MP40s glinting in the winter light. The soldiers are disciplined, confident, expecting submission. One officer steps forward, shouts orders in rapid German. Funk doesn't understand a word. A laugh escapes him, not of humor, but shock, disbelief, the human instinct to release fear through sound. The German officer freezes, confused by the unexpected response. To understand why Funk could laugh in such a moment, we must step back to the soldier he had become through years of combat. Born in 1922, Funk grew up in a small Pennsylvania town, the son of working-class parents. When the U.S. entered the war in 1941, Funk volunteered for the Army, eventually joining the Airborne, a unit trained to fight behind enemy lines, often isolated, often outnumbered. By 1944, Funk had already seen the horrors of Normandy. On D-Day, he parachuted into enemy territory, landing among scattered units under heavy fire. He fought through hedgerows, villages, and ambushes, gaining a reputation for calm under pressure and fearless leadership. Months later, he jumped into the Netherlands for Operation Market Garden, again navigating chaos, German resistance, and logistical nightmares. Each mission honed him for situations like Holzheim. The Battle of the Bulge, December 1944, brought him to the Ardennes. The forests and hills were icy tombs for soldiers who hesitated or faltered. Funk's unit was rushed in to stop Hitler's last major offensive. Snow and ice slowed every movement, frostbite took its toll, and German troops pressed with desperation. Each patrol could encounter a dozen enemies, or 100. Commanders emphasized caution, but survival often depended on split-second decisions. It was in this crucible that Funk became the soldier who could turn capture into opportunity. He had learned that hesitation could kill. That fear was contagious. That a single, decisive action could reshape the battlefield. As he stands surrounded, Funk's laugh ripples across the snow. It's a shock to the German officer, a jolt to his own men, and a brief, fragile moment of imbalance in the chaos of war. The pause lasts barely a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, Leonard Funk makes a choice. What happens next is rapid, violent, and decisive. Seconds will decide life and death for every soldier within reach. Yet even before the first shot is fired, one question lingers. How does a single man stand fearless in the face of overwhelming odds, when surrender seems inevitable? The answer lies in years of preparation, courage honed in fire, and a soldier's instinct to survive at all costs. This sets the stage perfectly with cinematic immersion, historical context. January 27, 1945. The pause lasts no more than a breath. Snow continues to fall, soft and indifferent, as 90 German soldiers tighten their grip on weapons they believe they already control. The German officer steps closer, MP40 still pressed into Leonard Funk's stomach, still shouting orders Funk cannot understand. The words don't matter anymore. What matters is distance. What matters is timing. Funk's laugh fades into silence. His eyes flick, not wildly, not in panic, but deliberately. He sees how close the officer stands. He sees the cluster of Germans packed too tightly together, confident, relaxed by surrender. He sees his men on their knees, alive for the moment, but seconds away from captivity. He understands something instinctively. This is the only moment he will get. Funk's hands move before the officer can react. In one violent motion, he rips his Thompson submachine gun up from its sling and fires point blank. The burst is short, controlled. The German officer collapses backward into the snow, the MP40 slipping from his hands. Shock freezes the scene for a fraction of a second. Then Funk pivots. He fires again, short bursts, center mass, closest targets first. German soldiers fall where they stand, some trying to raise rifles, others simply staring in disbelief as bullets tear through winter coats and bodies. The sound of the Thompson is deafening in the open field, A rapid metallic roar echoing off the frozen ground, Funk drops to one knee. The magazine runs dry. There is no pause. His hands move automatically. Eject, slap, seat, pull. A fresh magazine locks into place. The reload is clean, practiced, faster than thought. Snow sprays as bullets strike again. German soldiers scatter now, discipline collapsing under pure surprise. Some fire blindly. Others turn and run. Funk keeps firing. He doesn't chase. He doesn't spray wildly. He shoots with precision, shifting targets as threats emerge. A soldier reaching for a machine gun. Another turning back to regroup. Each burst is deliberate. Around him, something else happens. His men stand up. At first, it's hesitant. Then instinct takes over. They grab dropped German weapons. MP40s. Rifles. They shout. They move. The posture of surrender dissolves into sudden aggression. German soldiers who moments ago held absolute control now find themselves surrounded by chaos. The entire engagement lasts roughly 45 seconds. When the firing finally stops, the snow is torn and stained. 21 German soldiers lie dead or dying. Others are wounded, crawling, stunned. The rest are fleeing in panic across open ground, abandoning weapons and equipment as fast as their legs can carry them. 90 soldiers reduced to a routed force. Funk shouts orders, his voice cutting through the confusion. Prisoners are gathered quickly, those too shocked or wounded to run. Weapons are kicked away. The perimeter is secured. His men move with the focused urgency of survivors who know how close they came to disappearing. Silence settles over the field. Only then does the adrenaline hit, hands shake. Breathing becomes loud. The cold feels sharper than before. Funk checks his men one by one, touching shoulders, meeting eyes. Everyone is alive. No serious wounds. That fact alone feels unreal. Reinforcements arrive not long after, drawn by the gunfire. Officers step into the scene and struggle to process what they're seeing. Bodies. Prisoners. A patrol that should have been captured or executed, standing intact in the snow. Questions come fast. How many Germans? How did this start? How long did it last? The answers are almost unbelievable. Approximately 90 enemy soldiers, about 45 seconds. One man acted first. Word spreads quickly through the unit. Then beyond it. But this moment did not come out of nowhere. Leonard Funk had been shaped by years of combat that rewarded decisiveness and punished hesitation. In Normandy, he learned how fast enemy units collapsed when leadership vanished. In the Netherlands, during Market Garden, he learned that confidence mattered as much as firepower. And in the frozen Ardennes, he learned that surrender, real or perceived, was often only a temporary state. Psychology mattered. German troops that day expected fear. They expected obedience. They expected control. What they encountered instead was unpredictability. And unpredictability is lethal in close-quarters combat. The official records later described Funk's actions in measured language. Extraordinary heroism. Conspicuous gallantry. Above and beyond the call of duty. But those words barely capture the reality of 45 seconds where everything balanced on instinct and nerve. His men would remember it differently. They remembered the laugh. They remembered the first burst of gunfire. They remembered the sudden realization that they were no longer prisoners. As the fighting in the Ardennes continued, Funk remained with his unit, pushing forward through villages and forests as German resistance slowly collapsed. But something had changed, not just for him, but for those who witnessed Holzheim. They had seen how fast fate could flip. They had seen how leadership could emerge in a single moment, and for Funk himself, the war was not finished asking things of him. Recognition would come later. So would ceremony and citation. But in January 1945, standing in the snow among scattered weapons and stunned survivors, none of that mattered. Only one thought lingered: that if 45 seconds could decide the lives of dozens of men, what would the war demand next? And how many such moments were still waiting, unseen, undocumented, before it finally ended? February 5th, 1945. The cold no longer bites the same way. Snow still covers the Belgian countryside, but the front has shifted, and the sounds of war move farther east. Leonard Funk stands in formation, boots planted in frozen ground, uniform stiff with wear. He listens as his name is read aloud, his actions described in careful, formal language that feels almost detached from the reality he remembers. The words are precise. Official. Controlled. They describe how a first sergeant, confronted by overwhelming enemy force, acted with extraordinary heroism. How he killed or wounded at least 21 enemy soldiers. How his actions caused the rest to flee in disorder. How his courage saved his men. They do not describe the sound of breath fogging in the air. They do not describe the split second when laughter replaced fear. They do not describe how close it all came to ending differently. The Medal of Honor is placed in his hands. Cameras flash. Officers salute. Applause ripples through the ranks. Funk stands straight, composed, accepting recognition that belongs as much to instinct as to training. But the war does not pause for ceremonies. Within weeks, Germany's defenses begin to crumble. Allied forces cross the Rhine. Cities fall. Supply lines collapse. For the soldiers on the ground, victory feels less like celebration and more like exhaustion led on relief. Funk continues to lead men through villages reduced to rubble, past civilians emerging cautiously from cellars, past columns of prisoners marching west. The moment at Holzheim becomes a story told quietly at first, then more openly. Soldiers repeat it with disbelief, sometimes exaggeration, sometimes humor. 90 Germans. 45 seconds. A laugh that changed everything, but Funk himself rarely tells it. When asked later, he deflects. He talks about his men. About training. About luck. He understands something most veterans do, that survival often depends on choices made before anyone has time to think. Years later, historians will analyze the incident from multiple angles. Tactically, it becomes a case study in initiative. Psychologically, a lesson in shock and disruption. Militarily, an example of how small unit leadership could alter outcomes far beyond numerical odds. But stripped of analysis, it remains brutally simple. A man refused to accept surrender as defeat. World War II ends in Europe in May 1945. Crowds celebrate. Flags wave. Soldiers return home carrying memories that never quite leave them. Funk returns to civilian life, the Medal of Honor tucked away, rarely displayed. He works. He builds a life. He raises a family, yet the war follows him in quieter ways. In interviews decades later, Funk speaks with humility that borders on discomfort. He insists he did nothing special, that anyone in his position might have done the same. But history is unforgivingly selective. Not everyone does. That is why the story endures, because it forces an uncomfortable realization that courage is not always loud, that heroism is not always planned, that survival sometimes hinges on the refusal to behave as expected. Modern soldiers study cases like Holzheim not because they expect to repeat them, but because they reveal something fundamental about combat. Technology changes. Weapons evolve. Doctrine adapts. But human behavior under extreme pressure remains constant. Fear. Surprise. Decision. Today's militaries still teach the importance of initiative, aggression, and psychological dominance. Principles demonstrated in seconds by a first sergeant standing in the snow in 1945. The battlefield may now include drones and satellites, but the decisive moment still belongs to individuals who act when action seems impossible. Funk lived long enough to see that understanding deepen, to see younger generations learn his name, to watch history try to make sense of chaos by assigning medals and citations. He passed away in 1992, but the moment remains, frozen in time. A laugh in a field. A weapon raised. A choice made. And perhaps that is why the story continues to resonate. Not because of the number of enemy soldiers, or the speed of the engagement, or the medal itself, but because it confronts us with a question that transcends war. When everything collapses around you, when logic says compliance and fear says freeze, what would you do in 45 seconds? That question lingers long after the snow melts, long after the gunfire fades, and long after the war becomes history.